Edward had never known peace. Born with demon blood, he was a rarity, an anomaly that fascinated some and terrified others. He learned early that people only wanted him for what he could offer, not for who he was. Some sought his power, others wanted him dead. So he ran, from town to town, never staying long, never forming attachments. But even a lifetime of loneliness couldn't stop him from wanting. He laughed easily, played the fool, and wore his charm like armor. It worked, most of the time. Then he met Jack. It was late when their paths crossed. The night stretched endlessly above, stars blinking like distant gods who had long since abandoned the world below. Edward sat alone by a fire, the only warmth against the chill of the evening. He should have been sleeping, but his mind wouldn't settle. The crunch of boots on fallen leaves made his body tense. He didn't move, just listened, waiting. One person, steady steps, not trying to hide. A voice broke the silence. Deep, smooth, unreadable. Didn't expect to find company out here. Edward turned his head slightly, just enough to see the man standing at the edge of the firelight. Tall, broad-shouldered, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Not a threat, yet. Edward smirked and leaned back against the log, deliberately relaxed. What can I say? I like a little danger. He stretched his arms out, letting the firelight flicker across his face. You lost, stranger. The man stepped closer, his gaze steady. Not lost, just curious. Edward arched a brow. Curious about what? The best way to get yourself stabbed. The man didn't smile, but there was something like amusement in his expression. Depends. Are you planning to stab me? Edward hummed, tilting his head. Haven't decided yet. The stranger took another step into the fire's glow, the orange light casting sharp shadows across his face. I'll take my chances. A bold one. Edward's smirk widened. You always this reckless, or am I just special? Maybe a little of both. The man lowered himself onto a fallen log across from Edward, moving like someone who didn't ask for permission. Edward's fingers twitched toward the dagger hidden at his belt. He could have stopped him, should have, maybe. But there was something intriguing about a man who walked straight into danger without hesitation. He let the moment stretch, watching. The man met his gaze evenly. You don't seem surprised to see someone out here. Edward shrugged. People tend to find me whether I want them to or not. He let his voice drop, just a little, into something teasing. Though, I'll admit, most of them don't look quite as nice while doing it. That time, the corner of the man's mouth twitched, just barely. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough to feel like a victory. Edward tilted his head. So, stranger, you got a name, or am I supposed to keep calling you handsome? The man finally spoke his name, low and firm. Jack. Edward let the name settle between them before repeating it, testing it out. Jack. He gave a lazy grin. Good name. Simple. Strong. Very fitting. Jack didn't react. And you? Edward tapped a hand to his chest, as if offended. You mean you don't already know? Jack didn't take the bait. Edward sighed dramatically. Fine, Edward. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping conspiratorially. Though I have to say, you don't seem like the usual traveler. Something tells me you didn't just stumble across my fire by accident. Jack met his gaze, unflinching. You're right, I didn't. The air shifted. Subtle, but enough. Edward's smile didn't fade, but something sharp entered his gaze. And what exactly are you looking for, Jack? Jack held his stare. Just wanted to see for myself. See what? Jack exhaled, slow and measured. If you're as dangerous as they say. Edward chuckled, low and warm, but there was steel beneath it. And, what's the verdict? Jack didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered over Edward's face, searching, calculating. Finally, he said, still deciding. Edward laughed. Good answer. Jack reached into his pack, pulling out a small flask. You going to offer me a drink, or do I have to provide my own? Edward raised a brow. Bold of you to assume I'd share. Jack unscrewed the flask, took a slow sip, then held it out across the fire. A silent offering. Edward hesitated, just for a second, before taking it. Their fingers brushed, brief and fleeting. Warm. Edward took a swig, the burn of liquor chasing away the last of the night's chill. He handed it back. You always this trusting with strangers. Jack's gaze didn't waver. You always this welcoming to them. Edward smirked. Touché. The fire crackled between them. Edward should have sent him away. He should have asked more questions. But against his better judgment, he let Jack stay. And maybe, just maybe, that was the moment everything started to go wrong. Days turned into weeks. They traveled together, fought together, laughed together. Jack was different from anyone Edward had ever known. He didn't ask for power. He didn't try to manipulate him. He didn't treat him like something to be feared or controlled. He just saw him. And that terrified Edward more than anything. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that made the world feel smaller, like it only belonged to them. The fire crackled softly, low embers casting a golden glow against the trees. Edward sat cross-legged near the flames, his fingers absently tracing patterns in the dirt. Jack sat across from him, methodically sharpening his blade, the steady scrape of metal on stone the only sound between them. Edward's chest felt tight, restless, too many thoughts swirling in his head, too many things he didn't know how to say. He watched the sparks flick up from the fire, disappearing into the darkness. "Do you ever wonder if we're meant for more?" he asked, his voice quiet. Jack didn't pause his work, but his eyes flicked up. "More." Edward exhaled, shaking his head. "I've spent my whole life running. Everyone either wants me dead or wants something from me. I'm tired, Jack." His voice softened, as if admitting it made it more real. Maybe if I took the power that's been offered to me, I wouldn't have to keep running. Maybe I could finally be free." Jack's grip on the blade tightened. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The moment his mission would be completed. If Edward took that power, if he fully embraced what he was, Jack would have his reason. His duty would be clear. But something inside him twisted, ugly and wrong. Jack set his blade down carefully. "You don't need power to be free, Edward." His voice was low, steady, but there was something in it, something that felt dangerously close to pleading. "You don't have to become what they say you are." Edward let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Easy for you to say." He looked away, his jaw tight. "You don't know what it's like to have people look at you and see a weapon instead of a person." Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, the firelight flickering in his sharp, unreadable gaze. "I see a person." Edward's breath caught. Jack was too close, so close Edward could see the faint scar just below his lip, could feel the warmth radiating from him even in the cool night air. His presence was overwhelming, steady in a way that made Edward's chest ache. For the first time in a long time, Edward felt like he wasn't alone. The words slipped out before he could stop them. "Jack." Jack reached out, fingers brushing against Edward's wrist, the touch light but grounding. "You don't have to do this." Edward swallowed hard. "I don't know how else to survive." Jack exhaled sharply. His fingers curled around Edward's wrist, firmer this time. "Then let me show you." Edward's world tilted. The space between them disappeared in an instant, 1 second of hesitation, and then Edward surged forward, his lips crashing against Jack's. Jack didn't pull away. Instead, he deepened it, fingers tangling in Edward's hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him in place. It wasn't just heat, it was something raw, something dangerous, something terrifying and real. Edward gasped against Jack's lips, his hands fisting into the fabric of his shirt, like if he let go, the moment would slip away. Jack made a sound, low and almost desperate, before pulling Edward into his lap, closing every inch of space between them. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was everything Edward had ever wanted and everything he had feared. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Edward rested his forehead against Jack's. His heart pounded, his hands still gripping Jack's shoulders like he was afraid he'd disappear. "Tell me this is real," Edward whispered. Jack didn't answer right away. His hands were still in Edward's hair, his fingers still pressed against his skin. But then, he hesitated. And that hesitation was the first crack. Jack closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was almost too soft to hear. "It's real. A lie." And Edward never saw the knife coming. The sky churned overhead, restless and gray, as if it, too, sensed what was about to happen. Wind whipped through the clearing, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant promise of rain. Edward stood at the center, dark energy coiling around him, shifting like a living thing. It licked at his skin, whispering, waiting. Jack stood behind him, silent. He should say something. He should stop this. He should tell Edward the truth before it was too late. But duty held him in place, cold and merciless. Edward inhaled deeply. His voice was quiet, but steady. "I won't be afraid anymore." Jack's stomach twisted. He had spent weeks by Edward's side. He had seen the way he laughed too loudly, the way he threw himself into the world like he had something to prove. He had seen his reckless kindness, his stubborn hope, his loneliness. He had kissed him. And now he was going to kill him. Jack's fingers curled into fists. His heart pounded against his ribs, a war raging inside him. He had a choice. But he had already made it. His hand closed around the hilt of his blade. "I'm sorry," Jack whispered. Edward turned, just enough for Jack to see the confusion flicker across his face. Just enough for his golden eyes to meet Jack's. Then the blade sank into his chest. Edward's breath hitched. His body jerked, then went still. A choked sound left his lips, barely a word, barely anything at all, but Jack heard it. Jack. His name, broken, trembling, like Edward didn't understand. Like he still believed, still wanted to believe, that Jack would never hurt him. Jack's grip on the blade tightened. He swallowed against the lump in his throat. It had to be this way. Edward staggered, legs buckling. Jack caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him gently as if that would make a difference. Blood seeped between Jack's fingers, warm and wet, staining his hands. Edward was still looking at him, eyes blown wide, searching. Was any of it real? He rasped. His fingers clutched weakly at Jack's wrist, barely holding on. Jack's chest ached. He wanted to lie. He wanted to tell Edward that none of it had meant anything, that it had all been for the mission. But he couldn't. Instead, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Edward's hand slipped away. His body stilled. Jack's breath shuddered. Above them, the heavens opened. Light poured down, wrapping around him, pulling him upward, stripping away his humanity, lifting him toward his reward. He had done it. He had completed his mission. So why did it feel like he had just destroyed the only thing that ever mattered? The celestial energy engulfed him, warm and blinding, but there was no peace, no triumph. Only regret. Edward should have died. The blade had torn through him, straight to the heart. He had felt the agony of it, the way his body seized, the way warmth had spilled from his chest in thick waves. He had felt the life drain from his limbs, the cold creeping in, the weight of Jack's arms as he was lowered to the ground like something fragile. He had heard Jack whisper, "I'm sorry." And then he had felt nothing. For a moment, maybe an eternity, there was only silence. Then the pain came roaring back. It wasn't the clean, sharp agony of a wound. It was something deeper, something all-consuming. It was betrayal made tangible, curling through him like a sickness, a fire that wouldn't burn out. Jack had done this. Jack, who had kissed him. Jack, who had held him like he was something precious. Jack, who had promised, "It's real." A lie. Edward's fingers twitched. His lungs pulled in a breath, not air, but something heavier, darker. The ground beneath him trembled. His veins ignited with something ancient and raw, something that had always been inside him, waiting. The prophecy. Jack's blade had not killed a man. It had completed something, unleashed something. He could hear voices in the darkness, distant and sharp, whispering in a language he had never learned but somehow understood. They called to him, welcomed him. "You were never meant to stay in the light. You were always meant to be more. Let go." Edward's eyes snapped open. They were no longer golden. They were black as the void, swirling with fire and ruin. He gasped, his body arching off the ground as raw power surged through him. The earth cracked beneath his fingers. The sky above, once untouched and holy, shuddered. He heard footsteps, rushed, hesitant. A voice, sharp with alarm. Impossible. A priest, a hunter, someone who had been watching. Edward turned his head slowly, his gaze fixing on the trembling man. He could smell the fear rolling off of him, thick and pungent. The man stumbled back. You were dead." Edward's lips curled into something that might have once been a smile. "I was." His voice was lower now, rough, edged with something inhuman. The man fumbled for the cross at his belt. "Stay back, demon." Demon. That word, one he had spent his entire life running from, denying, fearing, felt almost laughable now. Edward rose to his feet, slow, deliberate. The blood on his chest should have still been fresh, but the wound was already gone. Erased. Like it had never been there. Demon. Edward tilted his head, testing the word. Then he smiled, sharp and wrong. No. The air grew thick, heavy. The man's breath hitched as an unseen force pressed against him, pushing him to his knees. Edward stepped forward, watching the fear in the man's eyes bloom into terror. He lifted a hand, fingers curling like claws, and the shadows around them moved, not like mist, but like something alive, something eager to obey. "I was a demon," Edward murmured, his voice almost thoughtful. "But that was before." His gaze darkened. Before he betrayed me, Jack. The name burned in his mind, in his blood, in his very existence. Jack had left him. Jack had killed him. And Jack had ascended. Edward let out a slow, shuddering breath. The ground beneath him cracked further. But I'm not a demon anymore. The man trembled violently, choking out a prayer. What are you? Edward's blackened eyes gleamed. Something unstoppable. Something made from betrayal and wrath, from broken trust and shattered hope. Something Jack had created. Edward smiled. Let's find out. The clearing erupted in darkness. And the heavens trembled.